Welcome. My name is Leora Wolf-Pursan. I'm the host for today and this whole series. We want to welcome you to School is in Session, a series of workshops on trauma-informed approaches and practices to steer into and through this school year. We are here today on April 3rd for workshop 3. That was not purposeful in the numbers and the date coincidence, but I love it. Today we are gathered to sit in inquiry and learning around narrative exposure therapy as an approach to be witnesses to support our students' trauma recovery. And as we all know, our own healing that we might get vicariously through supporting others' healing. So happy to be with all of you. Good afternoon or good morning if you are our colleagues in the Pacific Islands. The Pacific Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center is funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, and the disclaimer is to share that the views and opinions expressed today are of ours and the presenters only, and that we do ask, of course, for you to cite this presentation if you use any of the material moving forward, especially because it is content that our presenters and our facilitators take time to curate. So we want to give them credit where credit is due. This is the third session in our whole series. So many of you started off with me in a study session on SAMHSA's practical guide for implementing a trauma-informed approach. Last week, we got to hear from Valerie White on trauma-informed bullying interventions, and today we're focusing on a specific approach, narrative exposure therapy. You'll see that there are 3 more sessions after today. We hope you join us for all of them. Purposely, as the person who got to curate this series, I specifically invited folks with a different lens and approach and practice and way that we can actuate our commitment to trauma-informed principles into practice. So there are diverse speakers, content, and approach ways so that we ourselves have voice and choice on how we want to engage in this content. So you'll see on our main session page that every workshop has a trauma-informed or multiple trauma-informed principles that anchor the conversation. And today's anchoring trauma-informed principles are empowerment and collaboration. We know that one of the simplest ways to talk about what does it mean to be trauma-informed is that crisis, trauma, grief, stress, harm are things that usually happen to us, sometimes from us, but to us outside of our agency. And that experience of something happening to us versus with us is one of the most fundamental core elements of something being traumatic. So when we talk about empowerment and collaboration, we then re-envision that someone regaining, recovering, redetermining their pathway to imagining themselves in the world after the trauma or crisis or grief or harm they've experienced, that empowerment and collaboration are essential ingredients to that work. So we can't be doing trauma healing work on our students, right? Dr. Acuna will invite us to think about ways that we do them with our students. And not only that, that we reorient ourselves, that our students are their own directors of their healing journeys, and that we get to be witnesses both with maybe some helpful language, helpful questions, safety, for them to feel like they own the power, that they are their own laborers in their work. Right? So I want to offer that the definition from SAMHSA's practical guide from implementing a trauma-informed approach is that collaboration is a partnership, a leveling of power differences. That is essential language for us to be accountable to, a leveling of power differences between and among staff and clients. So it's not necessarily collaboration if we're still doing something over someone, at someone. And it's also us being conscious of our role as clinical director, as therapist, as educator, in the power that we hold in our positionalities and in our ways of approaching and creating spaces for young people to step into their own power, for us to potentially step out of ours a little bit more, for us to level those differences. The second principle is empowerment. I want to offer that sometimes there's some critique of the word empowerment, because it's often coded as we are giving power. I want to empower someone else. And even in that act, we want to interrupt that and say, well, I'm not giving power to someone. Sometimes it's us, redesigning or reevaluating the way that we hold power so that someone can further step into themselves. Excuse me. So the definition of empowerment from SAMHSA is individual strengths and experiences that are recognized and built upon. And I would offer us that we not just think about individual strengths, but community strengths, collective strengths, generational strengths, that we are aware that when a student walks into our office or our classroom, they are not deficit, they're not without, they're not injured or pobrecito, they're full, seen for who they are, and co-imagined for who they might become through the work together. I offered some resources if you're interested in learning more about the principles of empowerment and collaboration that frame our session today, both in education language at the state level, ways that we can navigate conflict culture as a way to find ways to collaborate and empower when there are harms at the collective level, and more. So all of those were just dropped in the chat. They're also hyperlinked in the deck, and I welcome you to continue the study of these principles beyond just today. Before I hand it to Dr. Cunha, we want to practice the walk. We want to talk the walk. So I'm going to invite us to think about these 3 questions for ourselves and what the values of empowerment and collaboration mean when they are present for us. I am really grateful to invite colleague and co-conspirator, Dr. Alejandra Cunha, who has told me that I can call her Alejandra after this, but I wanted to make sure that the doctor was first and foremost, at least at the beginning. And I'm going to pass the mic to you, Dr. Acuña/Alejandra. So grateful that you're with us. And thank you for the rich session that you've prepared for us today.
Oh, thank you, Leora. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining on a Wednesday afternoon. Look at that. I really appreciate you. I'm so happy and grateful to share this information because truly in my personal and professional life, I've lived the power of storytelling. So I'm excited to be here and talking about this. So I used to introduce myself by sharing my education and my work experience, but I read an article that models how to have a conversation with clients and students and interns about location of self. And so I'm going to share with you some of my identities in an act of purposeful vulnerability to acknowledge my identities and how they might inform my vision, that is what I see and what I don't see, and how that impacts my understanding of the topics we're going to cover today. And I just have to read this to you because the author of this article, Location of Self, Intersectionality in the Therapy Process, she has this beautiful thing that she tells to clients and to interns. And so I'm going to read it verbatim because I just think it's so beautifully said. So she says to clients, and not at intake, but somewhere around treatment planning, she says, before going forward with therapy, I like to share a bit about myself. I do this because I believe that my training is only one of the lenses that helps me to understand and work with problems in families. My personal experiences also inform my vision, what I see and don't see. And so I like to think about how my personal identities might be helpful or a limitation in our work together, and get your thoughts about this. I think it's important to be able to talk about this now and throughout if either of us thinks we may have hit a roadblock or a pothole related to this. So I just love that. And so these are some of my identities. I have to point out a couple that I'm most proud of. So as you can see in the picture, so that's at the top is me when I was graduating at UCLA, and my daughter, she was in middle school at the time. And now the picture at the bottom is me at my daughter's own graduation. So she is an NYU grad, 2023. And I have to say, of all the things I've done in my life, I'm most proud of that one. It's one of my purpose for sure. And it really gives me a lens. I feel like I became a much better social worker and clinician as a result of parenting my daughter. And then the other thing I want to say is I'm a recovering workaholic. I'm so proud of that. I feel like I've achieved, life and work harmony. And so that's huge for me. And I just want to acknowledge that my ancestors, my mom was from Chihuahua, Mexico. And so I don't know if there's anybody from Chihuahua. I saw Michigan, New York, Hawaii. I see Dallas, Texas. I saw El Paso. In fact, my mom's last name was Cardona. That was her maiden name. So I noticed somebody from El Paso, last name Cardona. Yeah, Torion is close. But anyway, the point is, I think the reason that I gravitate to narrative exposure therapy is because people from northern Mexico, Chihuahua specifically, are known for being very frank and direct. In Spanish, there's a saying, no tengo pelos en la lengua. I don't have hair on my tongue. And so there's something really beautiful. My mom gave that tradition to me, and then I passed it on to my daughter. And I told my daughter, we're going to talk about everything, even if it makes us feel uncomfortable. And so anyway, so that's the context. So as I'm talking about this, I know that it might kick up some concerns and fears, and that's all understandable. But I just want to say and acknowledge that I've lived it and I've practiced it in my family as well as in my clinical practice. So that's what I'm sharing with you. Before we get into KidsNet, I have to tell you the story about narrative exposure therapy. And so it was created in refugee camps and in developing countries. And the point was, how do we get emergency aid to areas in crisis, in conflict, and in war? So it's been studied primarily among refugees. And initially, mental health professionals delivered the intervention, but also it began to be delivered by non-mental health professionals like nurses. And sometimes they even reached out to refugees who had been through a course of NET and asked them, would you be willing to guide another refugee in this camp in the process? And so it's actually been delivered by a range of providers. So anyway, that's the background, and that's NET. It's standardized. There's a manual. I'm showing you a book if you're interested. The developers are the authors of the book, Schauer, Neuner, and Elbert. They're also the developers of KidNet. So it's standardized, short term. There was one study I saw where it was effective with adults in as few as 3 sessions. Trauma-focused, evidence-based. And essentially, if you look at the cover, you see like a rope or a string, and then some flowers and stones. So that is the autobiographical lifeline or timeline that's used. And so the person works with the therapist to create a thorough timeline of their life story. And what I love about it too is that because it was developed in these high conflict zones, not only was the storytelling therapeutic, but it often served as testimony. So it was written and signed and could be used to provide testimony to human rights abuses. So that's a bit of background about NET. And then KidNet was developed or adapted from NET to be more child friendly. And same developers. In fact, Ida's going to drop into the chat if you want to read a manual on how to do KidNet. The developers have created this beautiful, so it's chapter 11 of this book that you're seeing. So there's a book that's edited by several editors, and chapter 11 is the KidNet manual in this book. And we'll be referencing some scripts from this chapter in the PowerPoint today. And so the beauty about KidNet is that it really adapts net to children, and it invites you to use storytelling, art, ribbons, rocks, flowers, stones, etc., to help narrate and make the story come alive. So the target population, this is tough. This is tough in terms of ages, only because I've seen some studies work with 9-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds. And the thing about clinical practice is that we have to use our own clinical judgment in the room, meaning we can have a really articulate, advanced, 7-year-old, and we could have a 10-year-old who's more challenged with verbalizing, memories, events, and feelings. And so I'm hesitant to give a particular age number, but I invite you to obviously look at the student in front of you and what their capacity is. And again, what I love about NET is it's really meant for children and adolescents who've experienced multiple traumatic events, not just a single event. And we know from the research that refugees, adolescents or students tend to report or show PTSD rates that are really high, like over 20, over 40. And my own clinical experience, I'm retired, but I used to work for LA Unified School District, and we did school-wide screenings. And I did one myself at an elementary that I was working at with 5th graders. I've done school-wide screenings in middle school and high school. And what keeps coming up over and over again consistently is that the students in LA Unified reported an average of 6 lifetime stressful or traumatic events on average. And about 50% were reporting PTSD symptom severity in the clinical range. And it got to the point where my colleague, who's also retired now, Pia Escudero, we were like, we don't even need to screen. We just know that in any urban community in our district, half the students are probably walking around with PTSD symptoms. And when I looked at urban communities nationwide and even internationally, that seems to be the pattern. So the bottom line is, I feel like if you work in an urban community or if you work with children and adolescents who've experienced multiple traumatic events, this could be a really great intervention. And obviously it's been done a lot with refugee populations, and there's just a couple of studies looking at doing that with Native American, Indigenous communities, as well as transgender and non-binary youth. And I'm reminded, Leora, I'm going to take a breath. I'm more excited than anything. And there's a part of me that wants to just pack so much information in the time we have together. But I'm going to remind myself that Leora has invited us to come back in June and meet weekly to dive deeper. So I'm going to try to summarize more. In terms of KidNet providers, studies have described mental health and allied professionals, social workers, nurses, psychologists, psychiatrists, but also trained laypersons or paraprofessionals. Let's see. But what I love is that Shower, one of the co-developers, writes in the chapter, the KidNet chapter, that what they're really looking for is a provider who is empathic, can be understanding, provide active listening, congruency, and unconditional positive regard. That those are the key components on who needs to be providing NET. This is a list, a table. Please don't, I don't want to make your eyes glaze over. I'm a total research nerd. The only thing I want to point out from this table is look at all the different countries that have used NET. So mostly internationally, there are 2 studies that were done locally at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. And I just want you to notice the range in ages in these studies, and also notice the range in number of sessions. And so the manual may talk about having maybe 10 sessions, but some of these studies did KidNet in as brief as 4 sessions. So the beauty about KidNet is it can be adapted to the needs of your site. And then consistently, as you can look at the last column, consistently you see a decrease in PTSD symptoms, which is, again, why I love using evidence-based interventions, because I know if I'm going to spend 4 to 8 sessions with the student, at the end of the 4 to 8 sessions, it is likely that they will experience reduced PTSD symptoms. Whereas if we provide general counseling, as warm and as wonderful as that is, we are not guaranteed, or it's not likely that we'll see such a reduction in PTSD symptoms. These studies found also a reduction in depression, and then one study found even a reduction in selective mutism, because the clients or the case studies, the students or the adolescents had both PTSD and selective mutism. And then Children's Hospital not only looked at PTSD, but they also looked at resilience and flourishing measures and found an increase in those. Okay, so I'm going to stop geeking out and let's talk about why. So we talked about who, what, when, where, and now why. So why do NET? It's for the reasons that you said at the beginning. I read your chat comments, and it's to reduce the symptoms of PTSD among our young people and our students. And we do this by confronting the memories of the traumatic event and transforming the fragmented memories into a coherent narrative. That's going to come up again and again. And if I have time at the end, I'm going to talk to you about Bowlby and Ainsworth's research about coherent narratives and attachment security, and also Pennebaker's journaling studies on coherent narratives and physical and emotional health. If I don't get to it today, I promise I will cover it in the June series. And then, as I mentioned, social justice, that this intervention is really about therapeutic effects and impacts, but also about social justice, because it uses a testimony approach. It aims to document children's rights abuses, whether it's within the family or in war. I love this as a why. Why? Because there's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. Thank you, Maya Angelou. And then thank you, Elif Shafak. Stories can enchant, empower, and heal. And what's beautiful about storytelling, I think one of the reasons why NET is so successful internationally is because it really banks on this idea that, or the reason why it's adaptable to many different cultures is that it draws on this, or reinforces the idea of storytelling. Storytelling seems to be a universal human activity in many cultures, particularly cultures with the strong oral tradition. And so when you adapt it to different communities, it feels very familiar in terms of their traditions. And so it doesn't feel so Western, particularly for traditions that are not Western based. But even if they are, it works. So part one, I mentioned there's 3 parts. So part 1 is really assessment and psychoeducation. And it's really important the developers highlight that you really need to make sure, like an inclusion criteria for delivering or providing that is that the student has PTSD. So you want to make sure and assess the student for PTSD. Some studies have used the UCLA Child PTSD Reaction Index. Personally and professionally, I find that to be a little bit long, and I've used a shorter version, the FOA version. So again, when we go to the June series, I can give you some options for what you can use, but you need a diagnostic interview that includes trauma event checklists, and then psychoeducation for the child and caregiver. So this is where the caregiver is involved. The caregiver is involved in the psychoeducation piece, and is not involved, generally speaking, at least that's the format, during the lifeline and the narrative exposure part. But I got to consult with a clinician who does net with transgender and non-binary youth, and she gave me some really cool perspective on this. Because when I've talked about exposure with adults or children, parents or students, I've gotten a lot of pushback from clinicians based on our own fears. Like our clients are avoidant, and we're avoidant ourselves. And so I had a clinician ask me once, is there some sort of screener that can tell you whether somebody is ready to do exposure? And to my knowledge, there is no screener, but I rely on agency. And the clinician who I consulted with talked about a conversation and autonomy. And I always say, if a student does not want to tell the story, then they won't. And I'm certainly not going to force them. This is really about giving people the opportunity. And what happens is, again, in my experience, is that students have a really hard time telling the story to their parents because they want to protect their parents. And then parents don't necessarily know how to be responsive because they'll say things very well-intentioned, like don't cry or don't feel bad. So it's sort of avoidant coping. And so then the young people like, okay, I'm not going to tell my mom because she can't handle it. And so anyway, the bottom line is, if the student wants to tell the story and you're willing to hear the story, it's a beautiful thing. If the student does not want to tell the story, then they don't have to. And if you don't want to hear the story, then that's important to be aware of as well. So the clinician that I consulted with said, make sure that NET is the right intervention for the young person. And you can do this during psychoeducation. This is where you explain, this is what we're going to be doing in our sessions. And does that sound like something you want to do? Like, does that make sense for you? And is this the right time to do the work? In CBITS and TFCBT, there's preparation before you get to the trauma narrative. So you might do coping skills, relaxation. You might teach relaxation skills, etc. Again, those things are not specifically in the KidNet manual, but you're the clinician in the room, and there's nothing stopping you from taking a break, noticing their body language, getting a glass of water, doing a stretch, taking a breath, walking them through progressive muscle relaxation. Like, that's the beauty of being the clinician in the room, is that you get to use your clinical judgment about pacing. Okay, so that's part one, assessment and psychoeducation. And then here is a sample script. So I'm going to invite Leora to read this for us.
Great. Okay. Building rapport, a sample script. My name is Nell. I'm a educator from the University of Trauma Informed Champions. And I'm here to help students who've experienced extremely bad things such as war and forced migration and natural disasters, and to write down what happened. Before I talk with you about your experiences and the pain that children feel about when bad events happen, I was wondering if you could draw a picture about whatever's on your mind or bothering you right now.
Thank you, Leora. So that just gives you an idea of how you can introduce it, what language you can use, what rapport building activities you can do. I have a couple of more scripts. So if you want to read this one, Leora.
After the many events that you've experienced, most children or young people would be upset. This aftershock is known as a post-traumatic reaction. Our mind and body are designed to notice and remember dangerous information. Since when there are lots of scary things happening, it might be better for us to be too careful and very aware of what might be happening nearby in order to keep us safe. This survival strategy has become a part of yourself, but it is painful and tiring, as you know.
Okay, so I just want to say that these scripts are part of the PowerPoint that you already have access to. It's been sent to you, it's been dropped in the chat. And so I'm going to skip the next one, but you have it. And I'm also going to, oh, this is a really cool metaphor. In order to explain why are we telling the story, because you end up telling the story a number of times over a number of sessions. And the metaphor is either a messy drawer or a messy backpack. You could either try to stuff the stuff back in as they fall out, or you can put it all out on the table, sort it, and then put it back systematically. And that's sort of what we're doing with the memories. We're taking them from their fragmented state to a more orderly state. Or my favorite, it's what your high school English teachers did so beautifully. There was draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, and by the 5th draft, you had a coherent narrative. And that's what we're doing. And it just turns out that so much research shows the power of coherent narratives. Okay, I'm going to skip the case study. I wanted that to bring this alive to you, but you have access to it. Both the scripts and the case studies are from articles. So the scripts come from the KidNet manual that you have the reference for in the slides. And then these case studies actually come from 2 different articles that were published by Children's Hospital. Okay, part 2. So part 1 was assessment and psychoeducation. Part 2 is the lifeline exercise. So this is where you invite the student to lay out like a ribbon or a string and to identify, and you give them stones and flowers, and you ask them to identify positive and negative life events or moments along this autobiographical timeline. And so the flowers would represent joyful experiences, important relationships, and the stones would represent moments of fear, sadness, or horror. So that's the lifeline exercise. In the psychoeducation, you're going to explain the difference between cold memories and hot memories. And just a quick and simple explanation is that we tend to store cold memories like event facts, like event details, like what happened, when did this happen, how old were you, where did this happen? And that seems to be stored easily. What happens is that the cold memories get stored separate from the hot memories. And we're going to address the hot memories in the next part, which is the narrative exposure. And in the narrative exposure, we're going to try to connect or integrate the hot and the cold memories so you have a coherent narrative. Okay, so once again, I'm going to skip over the case study, but you have it, so you can read it. And so in the narrative exposure, you're going to actually invite the student, after they've laid out their stones and flowers experiences, you're going to invite them to pick out the most prominent stone experiences, and you're going to invite them to then tell you about, okay, so for instance, in the case study, the student talked about early childhood bullying. And so in the cold memory, in the lifeline, they might tell you it happened when I was in the 3rd grade, and this is what they said, and I was on the playground, and there are kids around. But in the narrative exposure part, you'll be asking them things about sensations, cognitions, and physiology. So what did you see, hear, smell, perceive? What did you think when you experienced that bullying? What did you feel when you were sensing and thinking that? And what sensations, thoughts or emotions or bodily react? What did these sensations, thoughts, emotions, and bodily reactions mean to you? So you're going to go a little bit deeper. And if you've got time, you can do this first with a flower memory before you do this with a stone memory. And so just so that you and the student feel comfortable and understand this process. And throughout this, you want to stay in the here and now. And in the here and now, they are safe. You are empathic. You are understanding. You are emitting that warm, unconditional, positive regard. So in the here and now, they feel safe and seen and understood as they're talking about the then and there. So it's that then bringing that then and there event and sensations and cognitions into the here and now, where they are understood and safe, that the healing starts to happen. Okay, so in the very last session, you start focusing on future flowers. So you had a ribbon, and the start of the ribbon is their birth. And then at the end, the last part of the ribbon is sort of coiled, and you start to unfurl the ribbon. And that's where you're going to place future flowers. So you start to ask the student about their hopes and wishes for the future. And the flowers represent their hopes and their wishes. And I know we didn't learn too much about Eric, but Eric is a transgender or transmasculine young person who was bullied, as we saw. And when asked about their future flowers, he said that his hopes and dreams are to be open and express his gender identity. And he explored options for how to express happiness for others and himself. He reframed negative thoughts about himself to be more positive and focused on self-love. And then was observed to be able to name complicated feelings and events and demonstrated decreased negative emotional responses to them. And Eric also shared that he hoped to build healthier relationships and break the cycle of isolation. So this is an older student describing their future flowers, their hopes and dreams. I went through it rather quickly. Again, this is just a taste, a teaser, an overview. You have the manual in that book. And then we have the June series. But I love this. I came across an article where somebody had created an intervention called Stories with the Z with urban youth. And I love the visual that she created. And the visual is, how do we take fragmented memories, arrange them, organize them in a timeline, pull in the details of the trauma that have been sort of cast off, and create an integrated narrative that includes a vision for the future. I loved the visual. They say, you know, a picture paints 1,000 words. So I loved this visual about the process of and the goal of narrative integration. Okay, I'm going to take a break, take a breath. I'm seeing stuff come into the chat, but I apologize. I have a really hard time multitasking. So I'm a little bit laser focused, but if there's anything that's important, please bring it to my attention, Leora. Thank you this is an amazing team, by the way. Ida, Ingrid, and Leora, I could not do this without them. So thank you guys for for letting me make the cut on your team. Okay, so I did want to talk about, yes, so, okay, so Leora knows Dr. Corrado. So what about potential vicarious trauma? So at the very basic level, what I found when I was doing narratives, trauma narratives with students, is let's pay attention to our body. Do we need a stretch? Do we need a break? Do we need to move, like take a walk? I remember the first time I did a narrative, I felt really tight in my body. I think I was like this the whole time. And so I asked the student, do you want to stretch? And she said, yeah. So we both got up and stretched and we started laughing and, got the energy and the blood circulating again. It felt so good. Do you need some water? I do actually. Are you noticing and paying attention to your body? Because I feel like we go, 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 we don't pay attention. So our body sends us messages like take a breath, drink some water. But because we don't notice, we don't respond. So first is to notice, and then it's to be responsive. I found that I couldn't do more than 2 or 3 sessions in one day because I literally felt spent, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically spent. So you might want to just notice. And I don't think it's a matter of like, as my labor and delivery nurse said, don't be a hero. Like it's not about like, I can knock out 5 in a day. I don't think that is the point. I think the point is to really pay attention to your body and really play the long game. And I love what my colleague at Children's Hospital said. She talked about when somebody is doing NET, the supervisors are really mindful about caseload. And you probably won't do NET on every student. There are some students that will say, yes, I want to process this. And then what's lovely is that my colleague said that even if you just get to the lifeline, you don't get to the narrative, that's still a win. There's still something therapeutic about laying out the lifeline. And so if at any point the student wants to stop because it's not the right time, that's okay to pivot and to do something else. And so I just wanted to highlight that. If NET doesn't feel like a good fit for you, or if it doesn't feel like a good fit for the student, there are other PTSD interventions. Okay. And then listen, I think this is really important. When we do this work, because we're human and because nobody gets to adulthood without experiencing some sort of stress, traumatic experience, unfortunately, in our world, we might have stuff that bubble up that we didn't even realize, like, oh, I didn't realize I was even there, and now it's there. So I invite you preemptively to consider doing this home practice. So I've read a lot of Pennebaker's journaling studies, and quickly, I'm just going to tell you, he did the studies a lot with college students, but he also did it with like widows and widowers and white collar workers who were laid off. There were other people who studied other populations, but the bottom line is this. He gave college students this journaling prompt, and it's on the screen. And he asked them for the next 3 or 4 days, meaning like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But I've done it with parents, for example, once a week. Like we had a parenting group on Mondays, so we did it every Monday. So for the next 3 or 4 days, I'd like you to write about your very deepest thoughts and feelings about an extremely emotional issue that has affected you and your life. In your writing, I'd like you to really let go and explore your deepest emotions and thoughts. So what happened, and then the accompanying emotions. You might tie your topic to your relationships with others, including parents, lovers, friends, or relatives, to your past, your present, or your future, or to who you have been, who you would like to be, or who you are now. You may write about the same general issues or experiences on all days of writing or on different topics each day. All of your writing will be completely confidential. Don't worry about spelling, sentence structure, or grammar. The only rule is that once you begin writing, continue to do so until your time is up. So he did this for 15 or 20 minutes. And I'm blown away by what he found. He had different groups. So he had the control group that wrote about like their shoe or something, describe your shoe. That was the control group. And then he had one group and asked them just to write about the event details, just the facts. And then he had another group, just the feelings associated. And finally, he had a fourth group, and the prompt was to write about the event details, the facts of the event, and the accompanying or associated feelings and emotions. Because these were college students, he asked their permission to check their student health center records. And he found that the students in the fourth group who journaled 3 to 4 days, 15 to 20 minutes a day about a traumatic event, they showed a 50% reduction in sick appointments at their student health center. So they were healthier physically. And what's interesting is he said that they seemed very distressed while writing. And initially the researchers felt really bad, like, oh my gosh, we're creating harm. But when asked, they said that it was distressing, but it felt good to let it out. And 6 months later, they were physically and emotionally healthier as a result. Pennebaker also studied the essays. Later, much later, he decided to study the essays, and he found that the essays that predicted better physical and emotional health outcomes were those essays that talked about the good, the not so good, details, and that got more coherent from day 1 to day 4. The coherent narrative with details, the good, the not so good, beginning, middle, end. Like all of the stuff that our English teachers taught us to do in draft 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So anyway, I think the reason why I love narrative is because I love storytelling. My mom taught me to talk about it. I do that with my daughter. I've done that with students, elementary, middle, high school, and beyond. I've taught grad students this journaling prompt. I've taught parents this journaling prompt. And I love that no matter what part of the world our ancestors are from, storytelling is going to feel familiar. So it feels very culturally responsive and honoring.
So the first question I got was, how do we, in the vicarious trauma section, was knowing that you opened beautifully with your identities, Alejandra. What are considerations when we might be working with students who have similar narratives or come from similar places that we do that might especially trigger us if they look like someone in our family or come from similar backgrounds?
Yes, I love the self-awareness. I love the self-awareness inherent in the question. And I'm like, safety first. You know, the healing of the student matters, but so does the health of the provider matters. And so I would say, knowing that, let's be proactive, preemptive. Let's go back to whatever therapeutic approaches. And I want to be really like comprehensive about what I mean about therapeutic approaches. I know that in my own trauma recovery journey, I've gone to individual group therapy. I've gone to a shaman. I've done Reiki. I've done a lot of acupuncture, massage, chiropractor. And so I've done journaling. And so I would say definitely find your healing practice. Focus, prioritize your healing journey. And make sure that this is the right time for you if you're interested in doing that. If this is not the right time, then there are other interventions.
I don't know how many of you are familiar with Alok Ved Menon. And they're a gender expansive and gender liberatory writer, poet, and they offer us the teaching that there's a difference between being witnessed and being seen. And that seeing someone requires us putting our own lived experience and lens on someone else's story. Witnessing is us truly, truly, truly listening to the story that emerges from them without interfering with our own story with someone else's. So that connects to what you just offered.
Yeah, and that's really skillful. That really
Yeah.
takes practice. Supervision is incredibly helpful. So not only like personal therapy, but also really good supervision to help you do that. And I will say, I mentioned the journaling to do it yourself to see what comes up, but also so you could live the experience like, oh, wow, it was distressing to journal about it, but I feel so relieved because the number one expression on their body and their face and in their words when I do this with students is a sense of relief.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I saw over and over again. Students felt unburdened and relieved to be like being able to take the heat out of the story.
Yeah, thank you. What does the narrative portion look like in practice with a client? Maybe you can offer a couple sentences. And as I'm warming up your brain, I want to also share that not only in addition to the coaching series in June, but Dr. Cunha has prepared videos in Spanish, English, Ukrainian, and scripts. And we're putting together a whole narrative exposure therapy approach implementation guide practice for all of you too, that will be coming out shortly. So that's exciting. Okay, sorry, Dr. Acuna, a little bit about maybe a snapshot of what it looks like in practice.
Absolutely. So that's a tough one. I feel like I'm looking at, there's 4 minutes left. I almost want to say, come to the June series.
Yeah.
But there's scripts in the PowerPoint, which you have access to. So that's what it looks like. In the case studies, it actually says what the clinician did and said. And so it's just hard to, at what part do you want snapshots of? There's 3 parts. There's, I mean, anywhere from 4 to 8 to 10 sessions. So what snapshots, you know what I'm saying? It's hard to describe, but I would say read the case study, read the scripts, and I feel like those are snapshots of what NET looks like.
Okay, are these evidence-based approaches like CBT, TFCBT, and NET requiring certification? If so, are they open to health allied professionals like OTs or just social workers and counselors? This is a good question because the word approach is specific in our title of today's session, not just intervention. So Dr. Acuna.
Yeah, so I would look to, I dropped off the links to TFCBT and to CBITS training. So I would defer to them, go to those websites, email, call, talk to those people about what they require. My understanding is they require mental health professionals to conduct those in particular. NET is a bit different. It can be, it was developed to be conducted by paraprofessionals, not to be, that it could be conducted by paraprofessionals. And I've talked to Children's Hospital about their interest in providing certification training, and they're going to get back to me. But yeah, it's, anyway, that's a difficult answer, and that's as much as I can say.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, good question in Q&A. Should this all just happen in 3 sessions or multiple sessions, or is the timing flexible? This is something that you and I have talked about.
Yeah, as you can see, I asked my colleague at Children's, like, how long did your sessions average? And she was saying, again, because of the nature and the amount of multiple traumatic experiences, she said they averaged 8 to 10 sessions. There was a young person who took a fully 20 sessions. But again, if you think about it, it depends on the number and nature of the traumatic events, because I could see it being done in 3 to 4 sessions, depending on the student, depending on the nature and number of traumatic events. So here's my contact information. Here's my email, and you can follow me.
Thank you, everyone. What a powerful session. Isn't Dr. Acuna such a skilled, both practitioner and presenter and facilitator and connector. Just really enjoy and appreciate your spirit that you come into every learning space with. Next, part 4, with Zeta Garcia, we'll be sharing practices on trauma-informed school counseling, counseling with care. So even if you are not a school counselor, you work with school counselors, you are not a school counselor at all, but you would like to learn practices, Zeta is a beautiful practitioner who has created school counseling programs from the ground up. And also we'll be talking about what does it mean to really wrap your arms around a particular role at a school in the way that we can be trauma informed. Of course, if you can't make next week, we invite you to part 5, the California Department, Project CalWell, the California Department of Education's team is going to come and share their statewide beautiful in English and Spanish family guide to support students' mental health and well-being. And then we end the last week of April 24th with our team member Melissa Smith leading us on a session on equity-centered coaching practices for trauma-informed collegiality and collective healing. So much richness in this session. Have a good end of your day or a good beginning of your day to those of you in the Pacific Islands. We see you out there.